To truly understand the profound tragedy of Adrienne Shelly's death, you first have to appreciate the vibrant, complex, and fiercely determined woman she was. She wasn't just another actress in Hollywood. She was a creator, a force of nature who built her own world when the one she found didn't suit her. Born Adrienne Levine on June 24, 1966 in Queens, New York, her life was first shaped by a devastating early loss. When she was just 12 years old, while away at summer camp, her father, Sheldon Shelley Levine, died suddenly of a massive heart attack. He was only 40 years old. This event imprinted on her a deep-seated awareness of life's fragility, a feeling that would both haunt and drive her. It was this profound connection to her father that later inspired her professional name. She legally changed it to Adrienne Shelly, ensuring his memory was woven into the very fabric of her career. This wasn't just a stage name, it was a tribute, a piece of her personal history she carried with her onto every film set and into every script she wrote. Her career began with the classic struggle of an aspiring actor, but her talent was undeniable. Her breakthrough role came in 1989's Hal Hartley's indie film titled The Unbelievable Truth. This led to more independent movies, most notably 1990's Trust, which cemented her status as a rising star in the indie scene. However, Adrienne quickly grew frustrated with the shallow expectations and systemic sexism of the industry. She was an artist, a thinker, and she refused to be commodified. In a story that has since become a telling part of her legacy, an agent once coldly informed her that she needed to look effable if she wanted to land roles. This crass demand was a stark reflection of the barriers she faced. The pressure didn't only come from faceless agents, it came from the highest levels of power. She realized that if she wanted to play complex, authentic characters, she couldn't wait for someone to hand her those roles. She had to create them herself. This realization marked a pivotal turn in her life from being an actress for hire to becoming the architect of her own creative destiny. This shift in focus led her to begin writing and staging her own material. She helped create a theater company and staged her first short play in 1993, taking control of her narrative in every sense. But her most personal and triumphant project was born from a pivotal, life-changing moment: her pregnancy with her daughter Sophie. When she was 8 months pregnant, buzzing with a potent mix of excitement and fear about how motherhood would reshape her life and identity, she sat down and wrote the script for a film called Waitress. The film, about a small-town waitress in a stifling marriage who finds out she's pregnant and dreams of a better life, was a direct conduit for Adrienne's own emotions. She was channeling her personal anxieties and hopes onto the page, creating a story about a woman finding her own power and voice. On set, she was no longer just an actor interpreting a part. She was the director, the writer, the visionary. Her co-star, Cheryl Hines, perfectly captured her essence during this time, describing Adrienne as a ball of focused energy, a woman who was doing everything, writing, directing, acting, and doing it all exceptionally well. Friends and colleagues remembered her with immense affection, often with a smile, describing her as a wonderfully contradictory person, an old lady in a hot chick's body. She was tiny in stature, but her mind, her personality, and her will were enormous.
The day before everything changed was filled with the kind of ordinary, joyful chaos that defines a happy life. It was Halloween night, 2006, and Adrienne Shelly's Manhattan apartment was buzzing with the sounds of a low-key party. Her almost 3-year-old daughter, Sophie, was dressed as a princess, her laughter a central part of the celebration. Adrienne was busy, a bit distracted, playing host to her husband, Andy Ostroy, and their close friends. The air was festive, but for Adrienne, there was an undercurrent of nervous anticipation. This wasn't just about costumes and candy. She was waiting for a phone call, the kind that could define a career. The film she had written, directed, and starred in, The Waitress, had been submitted to the prestigious Sundance Film Festival. A selection would be the ultimate validation, lifting her from a respected indie actress to a recognized director on a national stage. She was on the brink of seeing her years of hard work pay off in the most spectacular way.
The morning of Wednesday, November 1st, 2006, began with a comforting, familiar routine. Andy, who worked as a producer and director, had left for the office later than usual that morning. something he was later grateful for, as it meant a little extra time with his wife and daughter. The three of them left their apartment together around 9:15 a.m. The fall air was likely crisp, the city streets bustling with the usual morning energy. Andy drove, dropping Adrienne off at her separate apartment office on Abingdon Square in the West Village. This was her creative sanctuary, the place where she wrote her scripts and worked, away from the delightful distractions of a toddler at home. It was a normal, unceremonious goodbye. Andy watched his wife walk into the building, a final fleeting image of her alive. He had no reason to imprint the moment into his memory. He believed he would see her again in just a few hours. There were no ominous signs, no feelings of dread. It was, by all accounts, a completely ordinary start to an autumn day. As the day progressed, a subtle unease began to creep into Andy's world. He was busy at work with clients in from out of town, but he managed to notice the unusual and growing silence from his wife. It was completely out of character for the woman he knew as a ball of focused energy. He tried to reach her via email, no response. He called her cell phone, it rang and went to voicemail. He even tried the landline in her office apartment, thinking perhaps her phone had died. Still, nothing. This wasn't just being busy. This was an absence of communication that felt wrong. When he spoke to their nanny, she confirmed she hadn't heard from Adrienne either. This confirmation turned the unease into a nagging, gut-wrenching intuition. It's a feeling many people who have experienced sudden tragedy describe, a primal alarm bell ringing in the distance, a sense of the world's axis shifting even before you have any proof. The joyful noise of the Halloween party had been replaced by a deafening, terrifying quiet, a silence that grew louder with every passing unanswered minute. The unease that had been building throughout the day for Andy Ostroy finally culminated in a decision to act. A close friend had plans to attend an event with Andy that evening, and together they decided to drive over to Adrienne's Abingdon Square apartment office to check on her. The car ride over was tense, filled with a heavy silence, broken only by attempts to rationalize the situation. When they arrived at the building, Brian waited in the car, a silent sentinel, as Andy went inside alone, each step taking him closer to a reality he could not yet imagine. Andy approached the building's intercom and buzzed Adrienne's apartment. There was no answer. He buzzed again. The lack of response amplified the silence around him. With a growing sense of panic, he made his way upstairs to the 4th floor. When he reached her apartment door, he found it was unlocked. This was the first concrete sign that something was terribly wrong. Adrienne was meticulous, especially in her workspace. Leaving her door unlocked was completely out of character. He stepped inside. The apartment was still, eerily quiet except for the low murmur of a CNN broadcast playing on the television. The space, which was normally a hub of his wife's vibrant creativity, felt violated and empty. He called out her name, but only the sound of the news anchor's voice answered back. His mind was likely racing, still hoping to find her busy at her desk, but with each step further into the apartment, that hope began to disintegrate. His path led him toward the bathroom. It was there that the nightmare became real. Andy found his wife's body. Adrienne Shelley was hanging from the shower rod. The scene was one of immediate, devastating horror. Andy's mind, in a state of shock and disbelief, recoiled.
This was not the scene of a natural death or a peaceful passing. It was a violent, shocking image that defied all understanding of the world as he knew it. In the moments that followed, a raw, guttural scream of why erupted from him, a question flung into an uncaring universe. The doorman, who had come up to the apartment with him after Andy expressed his deep concern, heard these screams from the hallway. The life they had built, the future they had envisioned just hours before, had been obliterated. The joy of Halloween was now a cruel, distant memory. In an instant, Andy Ostroy was transformed from a husband, a partner, a father in a happy family, into a widower, a sole parent, and a man living what he would later call the worst nightmare imaginable. The task that now lay before him was one no person should ever face. He had to go home and explain to his 2-year-old daughter why her mother was never coming home again. In the immediate, shell-shocked aftermath of Adrienne's death, a narrative began to form in the media and, it seemed, within the initial police investigation. By November 3rd, just 2 days after her body was found, headlines were circulating that suggested Adrienne Shelley had taken her own life. Law enforcement sources indicated to the press that there were no signs of forced entry into her apartment and no obvious evidence of a struggle. To an outside observer, especially one looking for a quick, tidy explanation, it might have seemed plausible. But for Andy Ostroy, for Adrienne's brother Mark Levine, and for every single one of her close friends,
This official line was not just wrong, it was an impossible, offensive lie. They knew the woman they loved. They knew she was, as a family source insisted, a happy person who wasn't on any medication, didn't drink to excess, and was at the absolute peak of her personal and professional happiness. Her brother Mark knew with unshakable certainty that his sister would never, under any circumstances, willingly leave her daughter, Sophie, or their mother, Elaine Langbaum, behind. The idea of suicide was a betrayal of everything Adrian was: a fighter, a determined creator, a devoted mother who was buzzing with excitement about the future. Andy, a producer and director by trade, was a man used to solving problems and managing crises. Grief-stricken but fiercely determined, he became a detective for his own wife. He refused to let the investigation stall or be filed away as a simple suicide. He began calling the police department for updates, but his calls were met with bureaucratic inertia. At one point, he was told the lead detective had left for the weekend. When he asked who was covering the case, he was told no one else was assigned to it, with the person on the phone apologizing but reiterating their belief that it was a straightforward suicide. This only fueled Andy's resolve. He knew he had to fight for the truth because his wife wasn't there to defend herself. He began marshaling the facts of her life as evidence. He pointed to the emails and phone conversations she had engaged in right up until the moment she died, making concrete plans for the weekend and arranging to drop off supplies at their daughter's school. This was not the behavior of a woman in the depths of despair. It was the behavior of a woman deeply engaged in her life. The turning point came when Andy took his fight directly to the medical evidence. He called the pathologist, the renowned Dr. Michael Baden, a former chief medical examiner of New York City known for his work on high-profile cases. Dr. Baden performed the autopsy, and what he found was the definitive scientific proof that Andy desperately needed. He called Andy and delivered the crucial findings. Adrian had fought like an animal before she was killed. His examination revealed bruising on her body and face, concentrated mostly on the left side, and distinct injuries to her hands, classic defensive wounds that occur when someone tries to fend off an attacker. The official narrative was shattered. The truth was now undeniable. Adrian Shelley had been murdered. Her death was not a voluntary act, but a brutal crime. A fact that, while horrifying, restored her dignity and confirmed what her loved ones knew in their hearts. The case was now officially a homicide investigation, and the real work of finding her killer could begin.
With the autopsy report confirming homicide, the investigation was re-energized and took on a new, urgent focus. The police now had to answer the critical questions: who did this, and why? The clues that had been minor inconsistencies under the suicide theory suddenly became central pieces of evidence. The sneaker print in the bathroom that didn't match any of Adrian's shoes was now a potential roadmap to her killer. Detectives, looking at the scene with fresh eyes, noticed something else they had initially overlooked: a thin layer of construction dust near her apartment door. This small detail prompted them to ask about any ongoing work in the building. They learned that the unit directly below Adrian's offices was undergoing renovations. This was the break they needed. They entered the construction site and immediately found a match for the distinctive sneaker print found in Adrian's bathroom. The trail, once cold, was now warm and leading directly to the workers at that site. The police began questioning everyone involved in the renovation, and their attention quickly zeroed in on one individual, a 19-year-old undocumented immigrant from Ecuador named Diego Pilco. He had only been in the United States since July of that year, a young man who had come seeking a better life but found himself in a situation that would end in horrific violence. On the same day that Andy received the official news about his film being accepted into the Sundance Film Festival, a moment of bittersweet, heartbreaking triumph, he also received another, very different phone call. The detectives told him they had made an arrest. The man they believed responsible for Adrian's murder was in custody. In his initial confession to the police, Diego Pilco offered a version of events that attempted to minimize his culpability. He claimed that Adrian had come downstairs to complain about the noise from the construction. He said that at some point during this interaction, she had slapped him in the face. Pilco stated that he feared she would call the police, and because of his undocumented status, he would be deported.
He claimed that in a moment of panic, he pushed her. She fell and hit her head against a table, and he believed she was dead. To cover up what he thought was an accidental killing, he said he then carried her body to the bathroom and staged the scene to look like a suicide. This story, however, began to unravel almost immediately. It did not align with the evidence found by Dr. Baden.
The defensive wounds on Adrian's hands and the bruising on her face indicated a sustained, violent struggle, not a single accidental push. The truth, as it would emerge during the legal process and his later confession, was far more cold-blooded. The reality was that Pilko had seen an opportunity for theft. He had gone into Adrian's apartment with the clear intention of robbing her. She had discovered him there, rummaging through her back. A confrontation ensued. To silence her and prevent her from calling the police, he strangled her to death. Once he realized she was dead, he then made the deliberate decision to stage the scene, hanging her body in the bathroom with a bedsheet in a calculated attempt to mislead investigators and disguise his crime as a suicide. Diego Pilko was ultimately charged with manslaughter and sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The legal resolution provided a measure of justice, but it could never answer the deeper, more painful questions of how a simple robbery could escalate into such a brutal, fatal attack. Pilko was not a seasoned criminal. He was a young man who, by his own later admission, was desperate and in debt, having come to America owing thousands of dollars, a sum for which his mother had put her own home up as collateral. This context does not excuse his actions in any way, but it paints a picture of a tragic convergence of two vastly different lives. On one side was Adrienne Shelley, a successful artist and devoted mother at the peak of her life. On the other was Diego Pilko, a desperate young immigrant who saw her not as a person, but as an obstacle during a theft. Their paths crossed for a few terrifying minutes in that apartment, resulting in a loss that was as senseless as it was profound.
For Andy Ostroy and his young daughter Sophie, the conviction of Diego Pilko marked not an end, but the beginning of a different kind of journey, one defined by an immense and permanent absence. The legal system had delivered a form of justice, but it could not provide what they truly needed, a wife and a mother. Andy now faced the daunting, lifelong task of raising their daughter alone, while also ensuring that Adrienne would be remembered for how she lived, not just how she died. He became the keeper of her memory, the storyteller who would have to bridge the gap for a little girl who would have no first-hand memories of her mother. He made a conscious decision to keep Adrienne's spirit alive in their home, to speak of her often, and to surround Sophie with photos and stories of the vibrant, funny, and talented woman she had lost. Out of this determination, the Adrienne Shelley Foundation was born. Its mission was clear and direct: to provide support and grants to women filmmakers, helping them overcome the very kinds of barriers and sexism that Adrienne herself had faced throughout her career. The foundation became a living, breathing extension of her spirit, ensuring that her commitment to empowering female voices would continue long after she was gone. The public milestones of Adrienne's posthumous success were particularly poignant and painful for Andy to navigate. Just a couple of months after her murder, he traveled to the Sundance Film Festival for the premiere of Waitress. It was one of the hardest things he ever had to do. This was to have been Adrienne's moment of triumph, the culmination of her years of work and her defiant turn to directing. Instead, Andy walked the streets of Park City alone, a vial of his wife's ashes in his pocket. He scattered a small portion of them there, on the snow-dusted streets, a symbolic way of bringing her to the festival she was so desperate to attend. He brought the rest of the ashes to the film's premiere, a silent and heartbreaking presence in a theater filled with applause for a filmmaker who wasn't there to take a bow. The film was a resounding success, becoming one of the top films of the festival. Later, it found a wide theatrical release and, in a beautiful, full-circle moment, was adapted into a Tony-nominated hit musical on Broadway in 2015. Each achievement was a bittersweet reminder of the talent the world had lost. Andy was there to witness it all, a proud but grieving proxy for the woman who should have been center stage, beaming with pride.
The story of Adrienne Shelley does not conclude with a verdict or a documentary. It continues in the quiet, steadfast determination of those who loved her most. For Andy Ostroy, life after Adrian has been a continuous process of carrying her forward. He has never sought to pack away her memory or get over his grief, but rather to integrate the profound love and the profound loss into the fabric of his being. For Sophie, now a young woman, the journey of knowing her mother is an ongoing, evolving process. She did not have the chance to create her own memories, so she has had to assemble a portrait of her mother from the stories, films, and photographs carefully preserved by her father. In a powerful and symbolic moment captured in the documentary, Sophie recreates her mother's pose in a photo taken in front of the Moulin Rouge, a tangible connection across time. Ultimately, the legacy of Adrian Shelley is a mosaic crafted from love, art, and resilience. It lives on in the success of The Waitress as a film and a Broadway musical, a story about a woman finding her power that was written by a woman who found her own. It thrives in the work of the countless women filmmakers supported by her foundation, who are given a chance to tell their stories because Adrian's family ensured her voice would not be silenced. It echoes in the strength of a husband who transformed his nightmare into a force for good. And it is embodied in the spirit of a daughter who carries her mother's name and her creative fire into the future. There is no closure for Andy and Sophie because Adrian is not a chapter that is ended. She is a constant, loving presence in their lives, a guiding star whose light, though extinguished too soon, continues to illuminate their path forward. If this story touched you anywhere in the heart, do well to subscribe. Thank you for your love and support. I will be seeing you on our next episode.